I don't know if you guys remember this guy from Velvet. Let's see if I can find it. See if this is working. Yes. We're kind of like a two-headed monster with complementary interests that we'll find work really well together. Plus, I just like to show this picture of Andrea and myself and say that I hope everyone has experienced um, the moment when someone looks at you the way my husband looks at a half hour, because I think it's so romantic. Just the man and his menu. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, who I promised a second to present else. He's going to start talking to you about memories. And then I'll come back to talk to you about learning and what we can do right now to promote lifelong learning. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful short introduction. Well, hi Mia, and I was talking to Pat, and Pat introduced this talk saying like, well, I have a secret life, and I'm not gonna tell you about, but I didn't know that memories have a secret life. And in fact, this is really the problem. Memories don't tell us about what they do when we're not thinking about them, but they do a lot. And this has been like something that neuroscientists has been digging up for the past, I would say, 25 years. And I'm really excited because this is something that the field has been really working towards understanding. And I'm going to present you research that comes only minimal part from the students and from our lab, and mostly comes from other labs as well. But I think they are giving us a picture that 25 years ago would have been unprecedented. So we tend to think of memories as something like this. This is what I thought before I got involved in this area of research. And this is the way we talk about memory. It's like we think that we go around with this imaginary camera in our head that takes pictures and polaroids and files them away in a drawer. And when we need them, we just open the drawer and pick them up. And it feels like that, right? Sometimes you have to dig through a lot of pictures before you find the right one. It's like, oh my God, what year was I doing that? And sometimes they are just there, they pop out, exactly like when you open a drawer and they fall out like, look, I haven't thought about that in years. But in fact, this is actually a bit deceiving. So many, many years ago, this is like something that I remember studying about when I was in graduate school. A neuroscientist called Carlos, he decided, well, if memories are really something that's stored in the brain's imaginary drawer, well, we should be able to find this drawer. And he spent something like 2 decades going around examining the brains of different animals, trying to find what we call the engram. That's a fancy word for like the snapshot the brain takes from memory. And no matter where he looked, he did a lot of experiments with different methodologies. He was never able to find them. And he made this strange conclusion in a 1952 paper that was just short of saying, well, memories probably don't even exist because we could not find them anywhere in the brain. Now, Lashley was actually onto something that was really deep, despite this article ending in a short note. But it took like many decades for us to understand what they had. And what they found is that the reason we can't find memories like this is because of the way we study memories. So when you are a person like me who decides like to, I don't know, today I want to study this particular thing, you go back to your lab, you talk to your students, and then you design an experiment. And when you design memory experiments, you usually think a lot about like, okay, we're going to present this material and we're going to have people memorize stuff. This is a typical thing that we do. We have to memorize. This is what we call the encoding of it. And then we let some time pass. And then we ask people, hey, do you remember this? Or can you recognize which of these 2 pictures? This is what we call the retrieval. So in between these 2 things, we try to measure what happens. But what is really interesting is that everything that is happening in the middle of this. This is like trying to get to the sandwich, but we're only actually studying the 2 slices of bread above and below. And we're missing the interesting thing, which is what we're going to talk about today. The secret lies in 5 things that we have learned. And we started understanding what happened when we start thinking, well, not we, my lab, but we neuroscientists began thinking outside of the box and doing experiments that were not just this particular type of paradigms. So the first thing that happened was actually in 1957, an accident. this particular person, you might not have heard of him, Henry Morrison, is probably the most important person in the neuroscience of it. He was actually not a scientist. He was a person who just happened to have a disease for which the surgeon decided to take away a piece of his brain. What happened, though, is that after the surgeon, there was a success, he could not form new memories. So he was stuck forever, believing that he was like 23 years old, the day of the surgery, and not being able to remember new things. What was really interesting also is that this did not affect the memories that he already had. And this was what neuroscientists thinking, because if I remove a part of the brain, and this part of the brain is where new memories are stored, but not where old memories are stored, it means that there is some kind of trajectory, right? The memories start in some place of the brain, and slowly over the years, they move to another part of the brain. There is also another thing that we started to understand. The memories tend to be forgotten. In the case of Henry Morrison, his inability to form memories was just like an imaginary sense of forgetting that was instantaneous. As soon as memories are formed, just go away. But we started analyzing what goes on in this part of the brain that stores memories, at least at the beginning. And what neuroscientists found out is that there is not only one thing. There are multiple forces that are acting on our memories at the same time. This is the part where normally I would be walking up on the stage, which I'm not going to try to do here by the mic and the camera. But if you look at all these panels, you see all the different forces act on our memories, and they try to make memories be forgotten. There's things that happen because of biology. Proteins are made, they take away synapses. There are things that happen because we keep living. So we form new memories. Some of these memories are going to literally compete for space in the brain. And there are things that happen because of other processes that happen. For instance, like we remember a lot of memories, don't remember all the memories at all time. So this is a process that we call retrieval-induced forget. Sometimes memories are forgotten because you are not in the right place to remember them. And then there are some memories that are forgotten because we want to forget them. And one of the things that we discovered in the past 10, 15 years of research is that people are really good at intentionally forgetting bad things about them. And this is why after traumatic events, people bounce back. Now, this is the second thing that I wanted to say, is that forgetting is this kind of cool, so it's kind of a set of powerful forces. It's basically surrounding memory. Chantel, who is my partner in life and science, and always like providing the best feedback, always tells me that I use this metaphor like it's a battlefield. But one thing that I want to convince you is actually forgetting is largely good. This was actually research that was done by academic advisor John Anderson, which showed that actually forgetting is the reason we can't remember things in the first place. Forgetting is adaptive because not all the memories that we have are equally useful. And because memories have to compete to get real estate in the brain tries to allocate space to the memories that are more useful or more free. So forgetting is actually a good mechanism. Now that we cleared the way out of forgetting, I want to introduce the third important thing, which is that the brain always rehearses memories when we are not thinking about it. So this is something that was discovered again by accident in 1996 in a different lab by a guy who's called Bruce McNaughton. And when you study rats, you basically put tiny electrodes in the brain, and once the electrodes, you have them do different tasks. But the electrodes stay there in the rat's brain for longer. And of course, they record activity for the 10 minutes in which the rat is doing the classic like rat lab maze task. But then they keep recording when the rat is playing, when the rat is doing other things. And crucially, at a certain point, Bruce McNaughton and his students start looking at the rat when the rat was sleeping. We are really good at memorizing what things are, for instance, like in everyday life, or to memorizing facts, or to memorize what things are in time. This is something that we excel at. But our ability to speed compared to the rat's ability to find their way in mazes or to find where their food is. And because of this, the part of the rat that actually memorizes, that forms memories, especially neurons that are incredibly good at recognizing where things are in space. And we call them place cells. So the rat is moving around, it's a place that it already sees, there is a particular cell that is fine, like, hey, this is this particular location. And then there is another location, fine when the rat is in a different place. So for instance, if I'm on the stage, I would have a place. And if I go back to the podium, there will be a different part of the brain that is lighting up, and in this case, firing, and it will be the podium place cell. Now, when the rat is moving in the place, you can see that place cells are firing in a particular order. And that is because we transverse locations that are close to each other. So first I will put the place that is like in dark green, then the place that is in light green, then the place that is in yellow, and so on. But what Bush McNaughton and his friends found was that when rats sleep, these cells reactivate very fast in the same order of the path that the rat had learned that morning. So the rats are actually during sleep, they are reliving their experiences. There was actually a first indication that sleep is important for memory. The first like experimental demonstration, we all know that we remember better after a good night's sleep, but now we know why, because the brain during sleep was repeating these things. And Bruce McNaughton found this in other animals as well, rabbits, cats. Pretty much every mammal does the same thing. We now know that humans do the same thing. When we sleep, our brain goes back and rehearses memories of the day. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because this is the mechanism by which your brain counters all these forces of forgetting. Yes, things are forgotten all the time, but at the same time, your brain fights to keep them alive. Now, as part of this, an interesting thing happens. Because there are all these processes that would a little bit modify your synapses, modify the parts of the brain where your memories are, and then when you rehearse them again, they change it. They are remembered, but they are remembered and transferred to different locations of the brain. Because every time the brain rehearses a memory, it tries to find new neurons, new real estate where to store it. And that is the reason why Henry Molaison, after the removal of this part of the brain, could not form new memories, but still could remember the old ones. Because memories start in this part of the brain, the part that was removed from his brain, but then they change location. They change location because with repeating these memories over and over, they change. All right. Now, this is really cool, and so far, almost nothing new, right? We knew that we forget. We knew that during sleep, we forget really new. No, it really didn't. Now, little thing happened, we got found in the late 90s. We discovered that the brain does this thing even when we are awake, largely. First, we discovered that thanks to years of collecting neuroimaging studies to fMRI start on humans when they are doing various tasks, we discovered that there is a lot of brain activity that goes on when people are doing absolutely nothing. In fact, now many neuroscientists like me and Chantel prefer to put people in the MRI scanner beside the brain, and instead of asking them to do something, we ask them to do absolutely nothing for 5 minutes. Because what happens is really interesting. We see the brain lighting up. Now, some people are just like wondering, thinking about the day, what do I do, and so on. But what really is interesting, is captivating, is that a little bit of this activity at very low frequencies has its own nature and its own structure. We're not fully aware of it, but it contains signals that actually are correlated with the activity of our memories. So it's kind of like these two networks are taking turns in speaking to each other at a very low frequency when you're doing nothing. And in fact, this activity keeps going on. Even if you start doing something, these two networks will tend to be anti-correlated. The network in orange is particularly important because this is a network that really likes to talk, to wake up and start moving, going up and down when you're not doing anything in particular. We call this the default mode network. And default mode really means this. When you're not doing something else, when you are at default, this network is the one that shows the performance activity. Now, so we know that this is the network that connects the part of the brain that is initially involved from memories with all the rest. All right. Last thing that we found out recently. After this deformal network was found, people start looking at, okay, what is the typical activity of this network in people who are young, old, in people that have some particular disease or other type of disease. And they found out something really interesting. Pretty much all the conditions that we know of that are associated with memory loss involve, to some extent, a disruption of the activity of this network. This network is involved in keeping memories and, rehearsing memories, apparently, even when we are awake and we're not necessarily thinking about them. But now we know that when this network doesn't work properly, memory starts to be lost at a rate that is more dramatic than normal forgetting. So here is, for instance, like a famous study showing where is the angle that in that timer can be found in the brain. And you can see that it goes exactly in the location before. And now we believe that because of this, memory in Alzheimer's starts degrading and forgetting is accelerated. Right. This is the part that I'm going to talk that is really about the work that we've done with my collaborators in my lab. So in many ways, this is the part I'm most excited about. So when we started getting interested in this world of memories, we wonder whether we could actually measure the speed at which things are forgotten. Because the mysterious process of forgetting is part of this invisible secret life of memories between the two slices of the sandwich. So as Dr. Chadler said before, most of my lab does work that is in computational models, which means we try to essentially devise mathematical approximations to what the brain does. And once we have these, we can play around and simulate and see whether our simulations match what the brain does. So we started thinking of a way to capture forgetting in a series of equations that we can just play on a computer. In fact, we didn't even come up with a model. We adapted a model that already existed and we thought was really good. So this model is really simple. So there are two graphs here. You can look at the top one, and the top one is just telling you that if you remember something, or if you form a new memory, you form a trace. This is the beginning of the angle, the beginning of the memory. It's a trace and essentially formed in your brain. And this trace, because of forgetting, tends to slip away. This is the reason why the lines tend to go down over time. As time passes, your memory will become less accessible, will be attacked by the forces of forgetting. At the same time, you might also re-experience this memory. So I told you before, that this was a famous patient whose name was Henry Mollison. Now, by now, you have forgotten. There is no reason for you to remember, so forgetting is taking its course. But now you're repeating it again. Now you are rehearsing this memory, and now you have a bump in how likely you are to remember this activity. So every time you form a new trace of the same memory, basically you are reinforcing the memory, and the traces will come up. So the bottom plot, the one that looks like a little bit of a jigsaw way, is exactly checking this. If I form new memories, the total availability of the original memory will go up and then will start to decline. Will go up and start to decline again. And every time it's going to be reinforced a little bit more by the new trace that you form. So the characteristic, I skipped that. So the characteristic speed at which the trace is declining is a characteristic of the model. And when we try to simulate this model, we found out that actually this speed is something that makes a lot of sense because we can predict when people will forget something. In fact, for the last 8 years, we've been really busy in trying to measure exactly for every single person that comes to our lab, how fast the forgetting happens. We call the parameter, of course, the speed of forgetting, and this is an example. So because we are in a university, we ran a lot of experiments with undergraduate students. Now, undergraduate students have a great memory. In fact, when we measure the speed of forgetting parameter in our model, it turns out to be 0.29, which means that if they encode something in the morning, they still have a 5% chance of remembering 8 hours and 31 minutes. And to me, this is extraordinary. I don't remember things like 5 minutes. But undergraduates are pretty good. Now, what happens when you are like me and you're a 48-year-old man? Well, the speed of forgetting starts changing because of age. In my case, the speed of forgetting is 0.33. I have to admit that since I created this slide, my speed of forgetting has actually got down a little bit, so now it's 0.34. But that's an important consequence because it means that now my 5% threshold will be crossed not in 8 hours, but in just 2 hours and 45 minutes. And when I saw this graph, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense because I teach classes in the morning, I mention a lot of stuff, and then in the afternoon, students come to my office and said, Dr. Stocco, you mentioned this book or this fact or this student or this professor in class, and I have no memory. I talk, but that is past. For me, it disappeared, but for the student, 8 hours and 34 minutes at what? So they still remember it. Now, we also actually examined the memory of individuals who are older than me. These are individuals who are in the age of like my parents. And, I don't have those logs. So in their case, like the memory is about like 1 hour and a half. But also we have a cohort of people who actually suffer from memory disorders. We've been studying them for a while, and we found out that in most cases, the speed of forgetting is about 0.4. Now, this is not something that you notice because, the difference between remembering something for 20 minutes or 2 hours may not be that important, but it doesn't have to create some problems. For instance, if you're trying to watch a movie that lasts more than 30 minutes, let's say, there are going to be some details of the movie or TV show that are going to be forgotten by the time you reach the end. And this is actually what is the first thing that people come to memory clinics complain about. I have trouble following some things. But of course, for most of their life, they are pretty fine, right? In most of your life, an horizon of 20 minutes because you forget stuff is absolutely okay. You can pick up keys, go drive to the good store, and things are still within this comfortable horizon when you don't forget. We also had the opportunity to study some people who do actually have Alzheimer's disease. And we measured their speed of forgetting. And this is where things become tough because as far as we can see, when the speed of forgetting goes above 0.5, the time at which you forget something below the 5% threshold is less than 5 minutes. Now, this is way harder because all of a sudden, even having a conversation, taking turns, becomes a little bit more complicated. So how do we measure this? So a colleague in the Netherlands actually found this incredibly clever way of measuring the speed of forgetting, which we now can do just with a 5-minute test that you can take literally on your phone. So this is actually a phone app that will just give you random things to memorize. For instance, names of verbs, in this case, names of pasta shape. I'm Italian, so I was really fond of this lecture. And this app is like a game. So they ask you, okay, this is the name of the type of pasta, it's called fettuccine. Then you say, okay, now I memorize it. And then it asks you, okay, what's the name of this pasta again? Say fettuccine. And then it will present something different. Okay, this is orecchiette, this is fusilli. And then it will keep testing you from time to time, but it will actually adapt the time it takes you for, between memorizing something and be tested until the model makes exactly the same predictions of your behavior. So we're matching the model to your behavior as you're doing it. So this is actually really cool because we don't need to make you fail. It's not like a test where you actually are, I don't remember this, I don't remember this. It's just that the model is adapting to you and it's much nicer to do. And it's also fast. So we asked my student actually develop a way to give this on phones to a bunch of people that were coming to set of clinics for memory problems. Some of them have normal memory, but they are concerned. Some of them are starting to show problems like mild cognitive impairment. And this is actually a student, Holly A, and she collected data from these individuals for 1 full year. Every week, she will send a text message says like, hey, it's time to do a new test. And every week, the test will be different because we don't want people to get bored. And she created like over 60 different lessons, as we call them, including names of plants, names of birds, names of actors, names of movies. And she went on to do this. And then we went back and analyzed the data, and we found out, we followed for 1 year, some of these individuals had myocardial impairment, and we found out that over time, there are huge differences in how things happen in the brain between people who are starting to show memory problems and people instead at the same age, same education, same everything, but who are not having memory problems. And you can see the yellow line is the average speed of forgetting of the individuals who are with capital memory. And you can see that it's stable over time. But for individuals who are actually reported they have memory problems and they're being assessed and examined by a clinic, and we know that they do have memory problems, you can see the speed of forgetting is increasing over time. In fact, we can roll back. So we started testing these people like at a certain age, but we can project these lines on the left-hand side of the screen. You can say, well, you started probably diverging from the path 10 years before or 5 years before. So we're starting to have an idea what the trajectory of memory is. And in fact, we saw that this test is really good. In 8 minutes, we can give an idea of whether a person is going to develop myocardial impairment or not. In fact, you can see that in this plot, higher speed of forgetting on the horizontal axis corresponds to a higher probability of being diagnosed by a doctor as having some memory deficit disorder. And in fact, this is actually the thing that I still can't believe, but my students keep telling me, sure, our test is better than the test you do at the doctor. And you can do it at home. All right, one more slide, and then I'm done. So now that we had this tool, we thought, why should we stop just at testing people that are from the age of like 20 when they are undergraduates in our college to the age of like, I think our oldest participant was 96 years old. Why don't we go down and we start examining how memory develops when people are children? After all, this is a test that is really like ideal for you, right? Like you can do it on the phone, you can press buttons, you can make it cutesy. So I had this really talented student who came here and devised a version of this task designed for children. You can see it on the left-hand side, and this is a cute video game that she created where we tell children that there is a zoo and the zoo lost all the animals, and now you need to memorize where which habitat each animal lived in, and now you need to reassign. So like, okay, which is the animal that goes in this habitat? This is it, and then, okay, this horse was in this habitat. Where is this horse now? And so, and because of this, now we have also data from children. Yeah, that's what you can do for children before you can start going to school. This is incredible. And since we're collecting so much data on the variables before, and then people who are getting older, middle-aged adults, senior adults, and now we have also the curve of children, we can plot our memory evolves over time. And this is actually the first time we've been able to do it because we can see like how it evolves. And you can see the children start with a table. They are exactly like on the order of our patients with memory problems. And then between the age of 5 and the age of 18, 20, memory improves dramatically. Basically, by the time children are in middle school or in high school, their memory is improving like every month. And then, of course, you reach your 20s, and then from there, steadily memory starts to decline. But it takes a long time to decline. And as Dr. Prat is going to talk about, there are huge individual differences. All right, this is my last slide. And with this, I'm going to, I guess it's my turn to introduce now somebody. So I'm going to introduce my better half, retired Dr. Chantel Prat.
I had a feeling you were going to leave us all feeling very depressed. Anyone in this room under 20 years of age? Okay. I had a feeling we were going to end on this note. So I am really interested in lifelong learning myself. And good news, I'm going to give you the end of my talk right now. We are all still works in progress, no matter how old you are or how many minutes. Even if you're like, who is that lady at that pizza hit? Because it's been more than 20 minutes. I started. We're still learning and changing and growing. And I find that inspirational. So I'm just going to end with a few slides about how we can maximize lifelong learning and growth. I'm really excited that you have these opportunities here. And I think that step one is something you're doing by being in this room and learning about your brain. And so I am in the psychology department, but I study neuroscience. I study how brains work, and in particular, how differences in the ways that our brains work scale up to the way that we understand the world. And the main things that I've been interested in, how do we learn to read? That's something no one's being good at. It takes over 1,000 hours to learn to read. How do we learn second languages? How do we learn other things? So I did a lot of research looking at the particular aspects of brain design that can promote our ability to learn complex, desirable skills. But recently, I'm looking at this camera and I realize it's set for Andrea. This is so Zoom people don't just see like, anyway. Recently, I became aware of a fun fact or a not so fun fact. And that is that even if I can go in and measure precise features of how your brain works, this default mode network, even if I could catch those memories in their secret lives and try and use that to predict how well you'll learn Spanish or something like that, the subjective ideas that you hold about your own capabilities are often an even stronger predictor of your learning success than these things that I can measure at the lab. So just think about that for a second, because honestly, at first I thought I'm in the completely wrong profession. Like I've been mining brains and trying to figure out how to create the perfect environment for everyone to learn. But this is an idea called self-efficacy that was first developed by Albert Bandura, social learning psychologist in the 70s, and has been, scientific ideas come and go, and this has been gaining evidence as long as I've been alive. This idea that your subjective beliefs about your own learning are often the strongest predictors of whether or not you'll be successful. So understanding something like forgetting is a really important part of learning. The fact that we can only pay attention to a few things at once, all of these are mechanisms that help our brain build in priority, help our brains to, this competition for space, this forgetting, it's all a part of the elegant design that moves us forward. Our brain, learning from our brain's standpoint, is the way that we metabolize an experience and try and change it into something that will make us better. So think about that. Think about whether you've mapped out where you are on this forgetting line, it's pointless. I'll never learn a thing. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is. But what I want to tell you is that no one likes to do things that are hard and that we think we're going to be bad at. That's not a smart choice for a brain to make, right? So if you're telling yourself a story about how your brain works or how your learning works that ends with, I'm not going to be good at this thing, your brain is not anticipating a reward. And a brain that anticipates a reward gives us dopamine now. And dopamine is a neurochemical that not only makes us feel excited and motivated, it facilitates neuroplasticity that actually makes learning easier and more effective. So just think about that. at first I was really frustrated by this. And then I realized this is an intervention point. I can teach people how they learn, how they actually learn, and let those ideas about your learning come into alignment with your biology so that at the very least, if something is getting in your way, it's not your own attitudes and ideas about what you're capable of, right? When I put my head on the pillow at the end of the day, I don't want myself to be part of the problem that's getting in the way of me and what it is I want. Okay. So on that note, sort of figuring out how your brain works, I just want to say that differences are normal across the lifespan. So not many people have heard the word neurodiversity or neurodivergent. Sometimes we use those words to mean the same thing, but I'm really excited that people are starting to understand that not all brains work the same, and they're starting to sort of take pride in the fact that you might have a brain that has been diagnosed as atypical, whether it is a mild cognitive learning difficulty, a memory difficulty, attention deficit, etc. Neurodiversity is a word that's really meant to say something is outside of the quote unquote normal range. But what I've been talking about and what my book is about is that normal is not a place. It is not a way of being. There's a lot of variability, both with quote unquote within the normal range and outside of the normal range. And there are some really funny scientific conventions about how we decide where that boundary is. So I just want to show you this picture of a brain on a screen here is basically, if you ever read books about how brains work or even scientific articles about how brains work, 95% of what you'll interact with looks like this. And this looks like real exciting data. It looks like maybe even blood on a brain or something like that. But what you're really looking at is a statistical average of a group of people. And the vast majority about what you've heard today, even about how, those different points that talk about different age groups and how quickly they forget, the vast majority of what we talk about when it comes to how brains work is using a statistical average and saying this average is the way things work. And any variability around that average is treated as noise, measurement error. So imagine if I took the average of the heights in this room and I said people are 5'6". There might not even be any person in this room that's 5'6". And this is the way it works sometimes with neuroscience. So this is my data. It's coming from a very non-diverse group of Carnegie Mellon undergraduates, reading single sentences in their native language while laying into the memorized scanner, looking through a mirror, and just reading these sentences that are not ambiguous. This is what the average looks like. So these are all typically developing, healthy young adults with no diagnosed learning disorder and right-handed and all these other things we do to try and make everybody look the same. This is what the individuals that go into that. So I have spent my life arguing that if we're going to have a theory about how the brain gives rise to the mind, these theories can't only be based on group averages, how those group averages change when we ask groups of people to do different things, but a comprehensive theory needs to account for why two different people doing the same thing use different parts of their brain. I think it's really important for you to understand what those axes are and how your brain works, especially if you're telling yourself stories about where you're going to be successful in the future and the ways that you want to grow. So I want to use a specific case study, which is about brains and aging. We just talked about memory and forgetting. And this is an experiment done by Clark, who's an Irish neuroscientist, and they recorded the speed of firing of different brains. I think that there were like 600 people-ish in this study. There are a lot. It's a very well-powered study. And they were looking at average speeds of firing in this default mode network of brains ranging from 11 years old to 70 years old. And I think you can't see my cursor, but I'm not going to walk up there and like Andrea. The main note here is as you move from left to right, we have these profiles of brain speed. And the take-home message is that the peaks shift as you go from the lighter colors, which are the younger ages, to the darker colors. Those peaks are shifting left. That means, on average, our our most frequent rate of firing of our brains slows with age. It's probably surprising. I feel it. I'm sure you feel it. By the way, it's slower. It is not always worse. There's a lot more going into those information packets as they come into the brain. And I think there's some data that shows that this helps you to be more creative. I think if there's a slower refresh rate, you have more information in each packet. So this is just one idea of a brain design trade-off, that you get something when you lose something. Okay, so this is what groups look like on average. But if you actually look at the data that go into this, now we're looking at individuals. Each dot is an individual. On the vertical axis, you see hertz. So higher is faster, lower is slower. The line is a statistical trend line. This shows what we've been talking about. As we age, on average, we slow down. But if you look, even the 60-year-olds, for instance, or even the 70-year-olds, what I think is fascinating about this graph is the individual variability. So within the 50 to 70-year-old age range, you have the fastest brain in this group and the slowest brain. And in fact, there's a 10-year-old here who's slower. Well, this is my not even the fastest 6-year-old, but one of the fastest 6-year-olds. It's faster than the prediction for the 10-year-old, and the 10-year-old is slower than the prediction for the 7-year-old group. We know this. You're moving around, you're interacting with people. We work differently, and aging is no different. There's variability in how each person changes with age. So these trajectories are very infrequently. Andrea's research, where he measured the same people over time, is an exception to the rule. But these sort of trajectories for aging are very rarely done longitudinally. You're taking groups of people, you're taking that mean average, and you're saying this is what happens in time based on that one-size-fits-all sort of statistical average. So if you're like me, you're probably wondering, is there anything I can do to get me on the top end of that variable scale and not at the bottom end? Since you're doing a brain health initiative, I hope there will be medical doctors or other people who are going to come in and talk to you about this. But I want you to know what I know. And honestly, it fits on a slide. Everything that's good for the body is good for the brain, especially heart health and things that we know for the heart. Sleep is a major contributor. When we sleep, in deep sleep in particular, the metabolic byproducts of your day get washed away and through your cerebral spinal fluid, removing toxins and things like this from your brain. If you wake up and you feel like this gritty, like it feels like the cogs are slow in your brain, you didn't get enough sleep, probably a physiological correlate of metabolites that are still left over that haven't been flushed out. Healthy diet, and there are things that make your brain very happy, like omega-3 fatty acids. I'm sure you've heard that enough times. Vitamin B. We have a case study in our family of someone who was vitamin B deficient, and actually it's a person who we may have heard speaking earlier. Brain was shrinking, and we were highly, highly concerned, and it was just a vitamin B deficiency. And when he started taking vitamin supplements, those cells popped back up, and his brain started working better. Exercise, anything that gets the heart rate up and gets blood moving to those distant parts of the brain. But also things like this, coming to this lecture, exposing yourself to new ideas and experiences. Plasticity in the brain is related to exposure and experience with the unexpected. And so as long as your life circumstances keep changing, your brain is going to work to stay plastic. All right. I know we have 5 minutes, so I just want to get through this quickly. Embrace curiosity. I talked about this as kind of the opposite of what happens when you think you're not going to be good at something. But one of the favorite things I learned about a human brain is that we treat information like a primary reward. So what you're looking at here, from one of the coolest experiments I've read about, it happened in 2020, that was looking at the mechanisms of curiosity. And they showed, first, they made everybody go without food, which some of you, I hope none of you skipped lunch, but probably help you stay awake in this dark room if you did. But they food deprived their participants, and then they put them in the scanner and they showed them a magic trick. Or they showed them images of food. They're hungry, or looking at magic or trivia questions, and they're rating how much do you want to eat that piece of food, or how much do you want to know how that magic trick works. And then they had to actually put their money where their mouth was and gamble with the risk of you'll either get to see this, how this works, or get this piece of food, or you might get an electrical shock. So that was the whole curiosity kills the cat. And they actually gave them shocks up front to see what their tolerance was, to make this seem very real. And what's amazing is that when a brain wants to know how something works, it's the exact same part of the brain, this red area here in our dopamine-rich basal ganglia, drives that person to say, yes, I want either to know how that thing works, or the exact same area tells the hungry person, yes, I want that piece of food. So an information reward is treated like a primary reward in the brain. One of the cool side notes is that for people who took the gamble, that were willing to risk a shock, that same part of the brain turned down the signal from the pain center, and essentially saying, oh, we don't need to think about how that shock felt. Right now, we want information, so we're going to move forward. These are just the different conditions and showing that it's the same part of the brain. In order to be curious, you need to be in front of something that you know a little bit about, but not everything about. I think that humility about the complexity of the world is a curiosity inducer. If you already think you know a thing, you're not going to feel curious about it. But also, so is perceived psychological safety. If you're exposed to a new idea that is in conflict with your identity, or you think, might be physically or psychologically dangerous, you're not going to feel curious. So when you go forward and try and do new things, experience new ideas, and learn new things, I'm going to quote Ted Lasso, one of my favorite shows that got me through the pandemic. He ascribed this quote to Walt Whitman, but Walt Whitman, it's not in writing that he's ever said this. Be curious, not judgmental. And I think that as we go about learning as adult lifetime learners, this should also apply to ourselves. It's so easy to say, you're so absent-minded, you're so stupid. Where did you put the keys? That's me every day. But you can just be like, oh, what was I focusing on? Why is my brain helping me forget that? And I think if you can approach your own cognition and growth with this curiosity instead of judgment mindset, you're going to set yourself up for success, or you're going to improve your chances of success. I'm going to skip this. I'll just say that not everybody is motivated in the same way. Some of us are motivated to find good things, and some of us are motivated to avoid bad things. And it's important. You can actually go to my website, just chantelprat.com, and take a test if you want to know what kind of learner you are. But if you're trying to motivate yourself to grow, I think it's important to consider what your motivational style is. And this is the final slide. I just want you all to appreciate that you are dynamic beings. We're all still becoming. Our brains are all still taking in these experiences and using them to try and do better. And as our learning continues throughout the lifespan, our brains turn these experiences into the physical components of our operating system that drive us forward as we make decisions. So thank you for showing up. I hope that your brain has metabolized this in a way that will help you. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've felt curious.